Welcome back to part 3 of Xruug the Dragon Breeder. Here we're going to start with the dragon egg doing the OSL. I decided to create this OSL because I wanted to balance some of the bright color from the main light source and add some more interest to what is a pretty major storytelling element of this figure. The dragon egg is definitely one of the main features of the figure and really helps to give, is a major part of the character. To do this, I want to have this sense of a glow, like an inner fire coming from inside the egg. So you'll see quite a bit of wet blending in this stage, something I don't typically do, but when trying to quickly sketch this kind of light from the inside, I can mix directly on the surface to create a bit of an initial blend. I'm also going to sketch some of the glow here. When doing OSL, there's a few important rules to remember. The main rule is that light travels in straight lines. Right, so if the light is coming from inside of the egg, I need to think about where that light is going to hit on the model, like radiating from the center of the egg, and anywhere that light, it cannot wrap around surfaces. It can't bend around shapes. So something like on the skull belt here, where there's this central ridge to the skull, it can't reach to the other side of that belt. Areas like the musculature here of the ab and the pectoral, it's only going to show up on the lower side of the muscles. Here on the deltoid muscles, it shows up from below. And then on areas like his arm, his forearm, it's going to show up on this inside surface and not reach to the area that's wrapping around away from the egg. The second thing to remember is that the egg itself needs to be brighter than any of the glow on other surfaces, right? So the actual light source itself needs to be the brightest element to create a convincing effect. So here, even though I'm using some red to create the glow on other objects, this is going to be nowhere near the level of brightness that the egg will eventually reach. The egg I will eventually push to a like pure white in the deepest recesses of the egg. So I continue around essentially thinking about the same way I would consider volumetric lighting. I need to think about the OSL in the same way. When doing this, a lot of times you might find that like when you're trying to do an underlight source, you often paint light sources coming from above. And because of this, you're more practiced thinking about light coming from the overhead, and you may find it easier to actually flip the model over to have a better interpretation of the direction of the light source or a better understanding of the volumes. It could be a somewhat simple trick to understand better the directionality of the light. Here I'm mixing more orange into the egg, and I'm focusing mostly on these scale-like cracks of the egg. And here I'm creating a bit of a wash to allow this brighter tone to flow into the recesses of the egg, because those deepest recesses of the egg is where I want the glow to be most focused, that's going to help give a sense of an inner glow as opposed to like the glow is on the surface of the egg itself. So here, areas that are close to in proximity to the egg, I continue to push the light more. It's also important to consider that the natural value of the materials that you're painting on. So things like the skin and bone that are kind of pale will have a more intense color than something like a black leather would. Right? That black leather is naturally going to darken whatever glow you put on it. So materials that are white and will accept color more easily will have a more intense amount of color on them. So just like when I'm painting any other surface, right, and anytime I'm doing the regular lighting, I just sketch in where the light will go, and I slowly begin to refine the process. I want the transition point of the OSL to be the darkest area, which is normally what's referred to as the terminator. That's the dark line that separates bounce lights or, in this case, a secondary light source. So often I want to stop and check and just see if the effect is working. And already at this stage, I get a sense that there's a light emanating from this egg. Here I continue to push the light more. Again, focusing on the value into the cracks of the egg. And now I'm basically erasing the kind of bluish tone that I had on the shadow side of the belt, because this orange red glow from the egg will eliminate any of that blue color from this area of the figure. I think it's really good to move back and forth with this, so I'm constantly making adjustments. If I see that some areas of the egg are too dark, I can, like here, I'm applying a bit of somewhere between a layer and a glaze that allows me to increase the light overall of the egg. And then if I need to restore some shadow to it, I can. But even in shadow, the shadow areas of the egg, I want them to be a bit more red, because there's the glow acts like a bloom effect, right? Just like if you were to look at a street light at nighttime, it has a bit of a gradient radiating from it beyond just the light source itself. It has a sort of halo effect to it. The same principle applies here, where even in what would be shadows on the egg, I want a bit of color and value to it to make it appear like it's that glow is eliminating whatever dark tones. So a dark red might be used instead of a pure black in order to create a shadow value on the egg. So now I'm using some yellow to further push the light. Again, just painting in focusing first in the cracks. And then if I need to push further, I can, right? It's much easier for me to kind of like build up the light to where I need it. And then I can pull it back down than than to not go far enough, right? Even in here, in the very deep shadows of his chest, I need to get some red. And on this area of the glove, this is a interesting spot because you have a lot of little layers to the kind of flesh armor that he has, and I need to think about how those little layers will catch the light. Now you can see just how red the shadow side of the belt is, and I will continue to push the light more and more until it reaches the point that I'm happy with. This is this part of the arm of the dragon here that's coming over top of the shoulder. I treat as, it's a cylinder, so only the bottom part of that cylinder is facing towards the egg, so that's the area that will get the OSL on it. Another interesting thing about OSL, when thinking about OSL compositionally, is you can really create a much more dynamic OSL if you place your light source opposite to, like, your main light source opposite to the OSL. So in this case, because the light source is coming from the top left, I can create really dynamic lights and shadows from the two separate light sources by having them be completely opposite from each other. Another thing to consider about OSL is that if you have OSL, right? If you consider, if the light source was coming from the right, the sunlight would be a more intense light than the light of the egg. So that main light source would drown out any OSL that I painted. It would reduce its effect on the figure, right? If you stand outside with a lighter or some other light source, to take your phone flashlight, for example, outside in the sun and try and shine it on something, it's not going to affect it at all, right? The sun is way more strong of a light source than your phone's flashlight. So it's much easier to create a really strong effect in the shadows than it is to try and paint a light source on the same side as the main light source. And I just continue to increase the light more on the skull, gradually mixing more orange into it. Again, I add some yellow back into the egg. Using it a bit thinned down to help it naturally flow into the recesses. And the effect I'm essentially trying to achieve is something like make it feel like lava or something similar, right? That red dragon that are often associated with fire continue to play on that kind of idea. Right? Now I'm using a yellow. You can also see that I'm mostly focusing the light towards the center of the egg, so the top section of the egg is not going to get as strong of a glow as the center, because I want it not to feel like it's on the actual surface of the egg itself, that it's instead in the center of the egg. That's the brightest part of the light is going to, when you're looking at it from the front, is going to be right in the middle of the egg. So now I have to increase the light a little more on the scaly parts of the egg to make it feel more like there's some more light coming in through the center of them. So this red now acts as a shadow color on these central scales of the egg. And I can gradually add some glow to where the light is starting to spill out from the cracks and further increase the light on here. This bright red also really helps me balance the color, right? This intense red saturation of the dragon armor itself, and gives me, because there's so much shadow side to the figure, all this, it's going to be very heavy on the red from the top left. This helps balance that amount of saturated red on the other side of the figure, and creates some natural balance between the two very extreme tones. Now I'm really starting to push in like a pure yellow. I'm trying to be a little more controlled here than I was when I was doing it as almost like a wash. And this is one of the things I mean about the lights. The thing that's creating the light source needs to be more intense than any of the glow itself. This yellow won't be used on his skin. I want to let the really strong yellow just be on the egg, only where it's at most intense, and then the outer glow, the actual OSL part of the egg that radiates onto the skin will be more just like a warm red-orange glow. A little bit of white also, or ivory probably in this case, also helps further push some of that light. So now the most raised surface, basically opposite to the way you would think about normally highlighting and shadowing a object with where you would shade the recesses and kind of highlight the most raised surfaces. Now I'm doing a bit of the opposite, where the shell or scales of the egg, where they're most thick, is where the least amount of glow is going to get through. So they get the darker, that'll be the darkest parts of the egg. At the top here, I decided I need a little bit more glow, so I can use the wash technique to get into some of the recesses up top. All right, so now jumping to the non-metallic metal parts of the figure, I want to achieve a more rough finish to the metallic. Normally when we paint non-metallic metal, we're often painting very like polished or surface, something like a knight in shining armor. That polished surface really doesn't work for a figure like this. It is much more of a hammered, roughly smithed shape. So instead, you get something in between, right? So contrast is still going to be really important, but the actual way I'm going to place lights are much more similar to the way you would place lights on a normal volume, right? I'm also focusing a lot on these like faceted shapes to the armor. So I'm trying to think about these small little, the rough geometry of the metal, and then also trying to push the edges. So the edge lights on when doing non-metallic is super important to create the effect, even when doing a rough metal like this, because that edge is going to get the area that's going to get the most wear, and that'll be where you have the shiniest parts of the metal, right? Where the edge has been worn and it shines through the most. So I'm working in all grays, right? Just various gray tones. And the areas that face towards the light, I'm going to mix much more yellow tones into the metal. And then these areas in shadow are going to have a lot more of this bluish metal tone to match the cold ambience of the rest of the scene. Right now, it all probably looks very similar, but you'll see when I start to push the light even more that one side of the metallic gets much more blue, and the mixture in the other side of the metal that faces towards the sun is going to have a lot more yellow in it. I still, even though these parts are in shadow, I still want to make sure that I define all the edges very well. Giving the shape and definition of these objects is really going to help sell that metallic effect. Now, I don't want to push the reflections as high in the shadow areas, but they do need to have more contrast than some of the other materials, right? So here I mix a bit of this like cold blue gray in, and I get some, this will act as essentially what my white is for the cold sides. I'm constantly checking to just make sure that all of these little edges, cracks, and shapes in the metal are well highlighted and well defined. This metallic surface also really serves the purpose of separating these elements from each other, right? So you have all of this red scale armor, these lots of natural materials between leather, scale, skin. This this metal, all these metal object parts to the figure really help distinguish those natural materials from each other, right? They act as kind of a contrasting border between the two. Here I'm just trying to add a little bit more definition to the leather. Using the side of the brush, creating some little cracks in the leather elements. I'm also trying to be a little bit irregular with my brush strokes and lines here. I don't need it to be perfect, right? It's not a perfect surface. So letting the brush skip or create little, marks and dots, and those create little dents and dings in the metal to further sell that this is, a rough surface. And so now using more of this yellow, kind of yellow gray, begins to create a contrast between the cold side of the metallic and the more sunlight facing side. The more polished a metal is, also the more you're going to get environmental reflections. Essentially, like when a metal surface is at maximum polish, it functions as a mirror, so it reflects everything you see. The less polished, the rougher a metallic surface, we see more grays, right? So if you want to do a rough metallic surface, try and stick to more achromatic colors, right? Much more desaturated tones. And you can kind of see it doesn't take a whole lot to begin to create the effect, right? You don't need to go as extreme on the contrast for this. Pure white is not super necessary here. You can see I further just trying to emphasize these little dings and cracks and rough shapes to the metal. And it's really a practice in just painting edges. So here in this kind of black-brown mixture, I'm mixing a bit of that sunny skin tone that I used in the skin itself. That's got this like nice bit of orange in it. It's going to help me also include some of that natural warm ambient light. And I use a mix of the side of the brush and the tip of the brush here. The side of the brush can really help to get a nice thin line just on the edge. And then the point of the brush when I'm trying to paint more on the flat surfaces or create tiny like little micro fractures in the metal really helps me to paint those thin lines. So here I just need to define these ropes. Create a nice warm but pretty neutral tone. Just something to create a contrast between the dark metal and the dragon skin, right? I need something that's different, but it doesn't have too much color to it. And this just helps define those shapes. These really dark, the dark lining that separates the ropes also helps further increase this definition. And a few little bright lights to further emphasize them